The soft morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse apartment as I stood in the kitchen, watching the city wake up below us. My name is Elizabeth Hartwell, though the world has never known me by that name until now. For 37 years, I've lived behind a carefully constructed wall of silence, holding onto a secret so monumental that it could reshape the very foundation of everything my family has built. This is the story I've never told anyone, not my closest friends, not my therapist, not even my own mother, until this moment, until I decided that the weight of this secret had become too heavy to carry alone. I'm speaking to you today because I'm done protecting people who never protected me, and I'm done remaining silent about a truth that has festered in my heart for decades. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to all of Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. It all began on a Tuesday evening in March of 1987, in a modest two-bedroom house in a quiet suburb of North York, Ontario. I was just 23 years old, working as a junior accountant at a small firm downtown, making barely enough to cover my rent and student loans. My life was unremarkable, predictable, filled with the kind of routine that most people describe as safe, but I experienced as suffocating. I would wake up at 6 in the morning, prepare coffee in our cramped kitchen, and spend 8 hours surrounded by spreadsheets and filing cabinets. This was supposed to be my life, this quiet, modest existence, where I would eventually marry a man from a good family, have 2 children, and retire at 65 with a modest pension and a house in the suburbs. That was the plan. That was what my mother wanted for me. That was what society expected. But then I met Richard Hartwell. Richard was nothing like the boys I had dated in university. He was successful, confident, and radiating the kind of power that comes with old money and family connections. His father had built Hartwell Properties into a real estate empire that controlled commercial and residential developments across North America. Richard was being groomed to take over the family business, the golden son destined to expand the Hartwell name and fortune into the stratosphere of elite wealth. When he walked into the coffee shop where I was working a side shift on Friday nights, I noticed him immediately. He wore custom suits that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and he carried himself with the kind of assurance that only comes from never having heard the word no in your entire life. He ordered a cappuccino with oat milk, a specific detail I remember because nobody in 1987 was asking for oat milk in suburban coffee shops. He was different. He was untouchable. He was exactly the kind of person who would never look twice at someone like me. But he did look at me. He looked at me, and he kept coming back. Friday after Friday, he would arrive at 8 p.m., order his cappuccino, and sit in the corner reading the Globe and Mail and financial journals. After 3 weeks, he finally spoke to me. He asked my name. He asked about my job. He asked if I was seeing anyone. Within 2 months, we were dating. Within 6 months, he had proposed with a 3-carat diamond ring that felt like it belonged in a museum rather than on my hand. My mother was ecstatic. My friends were envious. Everyone told me I had won the lottery, that I should be grateful, that this was the kind of opportunity most women only dreamed about. What they didn't understand was that I hadn't won anything. I had sacrificed everything. From the moment I married Richard, I became a reflection in a mirror. I was expected to look a certain way, speak a certain way, and think a certain way. His mother, Catherine, a cold, calculating woman whose ancestors dated back to the founding families of Toronto, made it immediately clear that I would never be good enough, no matter what I did. I was the daughter of a postal worker and a nurse. I had attended public schools. I had never traveled to Europe on a summer holiday. I was, in her eyes, a social climber who had managed to seduce her son with a pretty face and a naive charm. Richard's father, Marcus Hartwell, was somewhat warmer, but he was also completely consumed with the business. Family dinners were rarely family dinners. They were business meetings where Marcus would discuss market fluctuations and property acquisitions while Catherine monitored me to ensure I wasn't using the wrong fork or laughing too loudly. Richard, caught between his demanding father and his difficult mother, often seemed uncomfortable in his own home. He would look at me with something like pity in his eyes, as if he understood that I had been sold a fantasy and would spend the rest of my life trying to fit into a life that would never belong to me. But here's what nobody knew. While Richard and his family were living their glamorous lives, throwing charity galas and summering in the Hamptons, I was doing something else entirely. I was watching. I was studying. I was teaching myself the language of money. I spent my evenings reading business textbooks and financial reports. I memorized the structure of Hartwell properties. I learned about shell companies, offshore trusts, and investment vehicles that could move money through the financial system like a ghost through walls. I realized quite quickly that Richard was brilliant in the way that handsome men often are: superficial brilliance, polished and presentable, but lacking any real depth or strategic thinking. He could talk about commercial real estate developments and property management, but he didn't understand the deeper mechanics of wealth creation and wealth preservation. Marcus, on the other hand, understood these things perfectly. He had built an empire by understanding when to buy, when to wait, and when to strike with ruthless efficiency. But Marcus was also aging. By the early 1990s, his health was beginning to decline. He suffered a minor heart attack in 1993, and while he recovered, it became clear that he wouldn't live forever. When he eventually died, and this was always the assumption, Richard would inherit Hartwell properties. The company would pass to him like a birthright, and he would run it into the ground within a decade. I was certain of this. I could see it as clearly as if it was already written in stone. So I made a decision that would alter the trajectory of my entire life. I couldn't do it overtly, of course. Richard's family would never allow their daughter-in-law to purchase shares in the family company. They would see it as a betrayal, a violation of family trust, an attempt to undermine their authority. So instead, I created a separate identity. Using money that I had carefully accumulated from my own modest salary, money that I hid away dollar by dollar, penny by penny, I established a numbered corporation in the British Virgin Islands. I gave it an anonymous name that appeared in no directories and drew no attention. Through this corporation, through layers of trusts and holding companies, I began to purchase shares in Hartwell properties. The transactions were so small, so incremental, that they barely registered. 0.5% here, 0.25% there. I worked with a lawyer in Vancouver who asked no questions, and a financial advisor in Montreal who understood the value of discretion. I sold my jewelry. I cashed in my savings bonds. I even took out a personal loan against a life insurance policy that Richard had taken out when we married. Every available dollar went into this secret investment. Richard's family was so focused on their internal dynamics and their public image that they never noticed what was happening in the background. They never thought to look, never thought to question, never thought that someone like me, someone who is supposed to be a decorative appendage to their empire, could possibly have the intelligence and ambition to build something of her own. By the year 2000, I controlled approximately 15% of Hartwell properties. By 2003, I had reached 47%. I was, without anyone knowing it, the largest individual shareholder in the company. The irony was exquisite. Marcus was still alive, still running the company with an iron fist, still treating me as the slightly amusing but ultimately disposable wife of his son. Richard was oblivious, living his life as a vice president of a company that would never truly be his to control because his wife had already taken it from him. The only person who might have understood what I had done was my financial advisor, and I had ensured that he would never speak about it. The corporation existed in such deep layers of anonymity that even if someone had wanted to trace its ownership, they would have spent millions of dollars and countless years just trying to untangle the legal structure I had created. If you're still following this, comment, "I'm still here." Let's see who's really watching. Because here's where the story takes a turn that I never expected. I had built this empire, this secret, invisible empire, with a very specific plan. I was going to wait until Marcus died. Then I was going to approach Richard with my revelation. I would show him the documentation, the shareholdings, the legal structure. I would explain everything I had done, every dollar I had sacrificed, every year of patience and planning. And then I would propose to him that we run Hartwell properties together as true partners. I would finally be acknowledged, finally be respected, finally be something other than the pretty decoration that his mother tolerated at family dinners. That was my fantasy. That was the dream that kept me going through all those years of isolation and sacrifice. That was the future I could see so clearly that I could almost touch it. But life has a way of disrupting even the most carefully laid plans, doesn't it? In 2008, Marcus suffered a second heart attack, this one far more severe than the first. He survived it, but only barely. He spent 3 weeks in intensive care, and when he finally came home, he was a different man. His mobility was limited. His mental acuity, while still sharp in many ways, was noticeably diminished. Catherine, who had spent 30 years treating her husband as a means to an end, suddenly became his devoted caregiver. She hired nurses and physicians and created an entire support system around his diminished health. Richard, who had essentially taken over the day-to-day operations of the company while his father recovered, suddenly found himself in a position of unexpected power. He began making decisions about company direction without consulting Marcus. He promoted his friends into senior positions. He greenlit projects that Marcus would have immediately rejected. And slowly, subtly, he began to fail. The company that had been so carefully managed, so meticulously controlled, started to hemorrhage money. Deals fell through. Properties underperformed. Employees began to leave. Within 18 months, Hartwell Properties had lost roughly 30% of its market value. My 47% stake had gone from being worth approximately $1 billion to being worth significantly less. I watched this happen with a mixture of horror and vindication. I had known Richard wasn't capable of running the company, but I hadn't expected the destruction to be quite so complete or quite so rapid. I remember standing in our master bedroom, watching him return from the office one evening in 2009, and feeling something shift inside of me. I could tell him right now, I thought. I could show him the documents. I could explain what I had done and why. Together, we could stabilize the company. Together, we could rebuild what he had begun to destroy. But there was something in his expression that stopped me. There was something in the way he loosened his tie and poured himself a drink and collapsed onto the sofa that told me that the marriage had fundamentally changed. He had tasted power, and even though he was failing at it, even though he was running the company into the ground, there was something about that power that he liked. If I revealed myself now, if I showed him that I had been the larger shareholder all along, his world would collapse. Not just his career, but his identity. He saw himself as a Hartwell, as someone destined by birthright to control the family business. If he learned that his wife had essentially stolen that control from him through cunning and patience and intelligence, I didn't know how he would react. Would he be humiliated? Would he be angry? Would he see me as a rival rather than a partner? So, I kept the secret. I hired consultants to work with him on company strategy, people who could guide him toward better decisions without him knowing they were being guided. I made subtle suggestions at dinner about properties he should acquire and deals he should avoid, presenting them as innocent observations rather than strategic wisdom. I helped him, without him ever knowing that I was helping him, without him ever understanding that someone in his life understood the business better than he did. By 2012, the company had stabilized. By 2015, it was growing again. By 2018, Hartwell Properties had not only recovered from the 2008 crisis, but had become even more valuable than it had been when I first started my secret investment. My 47% stake was now worth approximately $1.4 billion. And still, Richard had no idea. Still, he believed that his brilliance and his birthright were the only reasons the company was succeeding. Still, I remained the dutiful wife, the silent partner, the invisible architect of his success. I had 2 children with Richard, a son named Thomas and a daughter named Victoria. I raised them with the knowledge that their world was built on a foundation of lies, though, of course, I never told them directly. But children sense these things, don't they? They sense the tensions in a marriage, the unspoken resentments, the distance between 2 people who share a bed, but not a life. Thomas grew up to be his father's son. Handsome, confident, lacking in genuine depth. He started working for Hartwell Properties at 23, expecting that the company would eventually be his birthright, the same way his father expected it to be his. Victoria was different. She was more like me. She was intelligent, observant, and she questioned everything. She studied finance in university and worked in asset management in Toronto. She was the only person in the family who seemed to understand the deeper mechanics of wealth and power, and I sometimes wondered if she suspected something about what I had done, though she never said anything directly. Then came the evening that changed everything. It was a Saturday night in April, and we were hosting one of Catherine's charity galas. The house was filled with Toronto's elite, lawyers and doctors and business owners, all of them dressed in their finest, all of them circling each other like sharks searching for opportunity. Richard was in his element at these events, talking to people, making connections, basking in the reflected glory of the Hartwell name. I was standing in the corner, doing what I always did, observing, listening, noting the conversations and the connections that mattered. Marcus was in a wheelchair now, pushed by one of his caretakers, but his eyes were still sharp. Catherine fawned over him, making sure he was comfortable, making sure he was being seen by the right people. And then something strange happened. Marcus asked to speak with me. It was the first time in years that he had initiated a private conversation with me. We went into his study, which had always been the inner sanctum of the Hartwell family business. His wheelchair fit snugly through the doorway, and his caretaker positioned him facing the window that overlooked our manicured gardens. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just sat there, an old man in a failing body, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "I know what you've done." My heart stopped. All the years of careful planning, all the layers of anonymity, all the meticulous work of covering my tracks, it had all been for nothing. Marcus had known. Somehow, impossibly, he had discovered the truth. I wanted to ask him how he knew. I wanted to explain myself, to justify my actions, to make him understand why I had done what I had done. But before I could speak, he continued. "I know about the shares," he said. "I know about the offshore accounts, the numbered corporations, the trusts. I've known for almost 10 years. My lawyers discovered it during a routine audit, and I had them keep it quiet. 10 years. He had known for 10 years and had said nothing. I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes, not from sadness, but from a complex mixture of fear and relief and something like vindication. He had known, and he hadn't told Richard. He hadn't told Catherine. He hadn't told anyone. Why? I asked him, "Why didn't you say anything?" He turned his wheelchair to face me, and I saw something in his expression that surprised me. It looked like respect. He said, "Because I recognize ambition when I see it. I spent my entire life building wealth, and I did it by recognizing opportunity and taking it when it presented itself. That's exactly what you did. You recognized an opportunity and you took it with a patience and intelligence that I have to admit I find impressive. If I had done it myself, I probably would have used brute force. I would have announced my intentions and forced my way to the top. But you did it with subtlety. You did it without anyone even knowing. That takes a special kind of intelligence." He paused, and then he said something that I will never forget as long as I live. He said, "You should be running this company, Elizabeth. Not Richard. Not me. You. You have the intelligence for it, the patience for it, the killer instinct for it. And more than that, you have something Richard will never have. You understand that real power isn't about being seen. Real power is about being in control while everyone else thinks someone else is in control. You've proven that you understand that better than anyone." That was the last meaningful conversation I ever had with Marcus Hartwell. He suffered a massive stroke 2 weeks later and died at a hospital in Toronto with Catherine holding his hand. He had left detailed instructions about what to do with the company, how it should be managed, and who should be in charge of various divisions. But he had not changed his will. He had not adjusted the official shareholdings. He had left everything exactly as it was, which meant that his primary heir, his son Richard, would inherit Marcus's 43% of the company, making Richard the largest shareholder, with me as the silent second with 47%. And then something happened that I hadn't anticipated. Richard called a family meeting. It was held in the boardroom of Hartwell Properties, in a glass office on the 42nd floor of a downtown Toronto office tower. Richard sat at the head of the table, Catherine to his right, myself and Victoria to his left, and a company lawyer standing to the side with various documents. Richard had inherited his father's stake in the company, and he was prepared to make a bold move. He had been consulting with financial advisors and board members, and they had concluded that the company needed new leadership. Richard, with his newfound confidence and his father's inheritance, was going to do what he should have done years ago. He was going to buy out the remaining shareholders and take complete control of Hartwell Properties. There were several minority shareholders scattered across the corporate structure, various relatives and old business partners of Marcus who had been given stakes years ago in exchange for loyalty and service. Richard's plan was to offer them all a generous price for their shares, well above market value, but far below what the shares were actually worth. He was going to consolidate power, eliminate outside investors, and become the sole controlling shareholder of Hartwell Properties. All of this, he explained with what I can only describe as genuine pride, would happen within 18 months. And then he turned to me and said, "Elizabeth, I want to offer you a special package. Your shares, whatever portion of the company you've managed to acquire, I'm prepared to buy them at a premium. $200 million. That's my offer. You could retire, travel, spend time with Victoria and Thomas. You could finally be free from the stress of business and just enjoy being part of the Hartwell family. $200 million, and you can walk away from all of this." He smiled at me, and I realized in that moment that he thought he was doing me a favor. He thought he was offering me an escape route, a golden parachute to a life of leisure. He had no idea that my 47% stake was worth 7 times that amount. He had no idea that the shares he was trying to buy from me were the true power in the company, the real control. His offer was an insult, though of course he didn't mean it as one. He meant it as what he believed was an act of generosity, the kind of thing a generous husband does for his devoted wife. Catherine smiled at me as if she expected me to be grateful. Victoria looked at me with an expression that I couldn't quite read, but that seemed to contain some mixture of curiosity and caution. The lawyer waited for my response. Richard waited for my response. Everyone in the room seemed to believe that this was obviously the right answer, the obvious thing to do, to take the money and be grateful and exit the stage of corporate power that I was never supposed to be on in the first place. I had a choice to make in that moment. I could accept Richard's offer, and I could finally be free from the weight of the secret. I could disappear into retirement, into travel, into a life of leisure funded by $200 million, which would be more money than most people ever dream of. Or I could do something else. I could tell the truth. I could show them all the documentation, the shareholdings, the legal structure. I could explain everything I had done, and why I had done it. I could claim my power and my place in this company that I had essentially built while hiding in the shadows. Or I could do something even more strategic. I could remain silent and accept the offer, and I could wait. I could wait and see how Richard's plan unfolded. I could wait to see if he succeeded or failed. And most importantly, I could keep my 47% stake because he didn't actually know I had it. I looked at Richard and I said, "I need to think about this. It's a generous offer, but it's a significant amount of money, and I want to make sure I'm making the right decision. Can we table this discussion for a week?" Richard agreed, happy to give me time to consider what he was certain would seem like a generous and appealing proposal. We left the boardroom, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. He didn't know. He still didn't know. My secret had survived the revelation to Marcus, had survived Marcus's death, had survived Richard's attempt to consolidate power. And now I understood something that I had never fully understood before. I understood that Richard would never respect me. I understood that no amount of revealed power would change the fundamental dynamic between us. He would resent me. He would become defensive. He would probably fight me through courts and lawyers and business maneuvers. Or, even worse, he would go to his mother, and Catherine would use the revelation as ammunition in her campaign to separate us, to protect her son's interests, to ensure that I was painted as a gold digger and a manipulator. And the truth is, she wouldn't be entirely wrong. I had manipulated. I had lied. I had created an entire alternate financial reality and hidden it from my family. But I had done it because I understood something true about power and family and the way that women are expected to be invisible in family businesses. I had done it because I knew that no matter how much intelligence I had, no matter how much I contributed, I would never be respected as long as I remained honest about my power. So I did something that even I didn't expect to do. I called my financial advisor, and I instructed him to sell my shares. Not all of them, but enough of them. I sold them to a carefully selected group of investors who had no connection to the Hartwell family, who had no reason to suspect that these shares had ever been owned by me, who would simply see them as a good investment opportunity. Within 3 months, my 47% had been reduced to 14%, and those 14% were now owned by various investment firms and private investors who would never connect the ownership back to me. Richard went forward with his consolidation plan, bought out the remaining minority shareholders, and by the end of the year, he controlled 78% of Hartwell Properties. He believed that he had successfully taken control of the family company. He believed that he had used his intelligence and his inheritance and his birthright to secure the future of the Hartwell family business. But what he didn't know was that there were still significant stakes in the company that existed outside his control, stakes that he had never even known to look for. And the largest of those stakes was now owned by investment firms that had no allegiance to the Hartwell family. My 47% of what was originally his company had been broken into 14% that I still controlled and 33% that was now owned by outside investors. And that 33% was enough to completely block any major decision that Richard might want to make. He controlled the company nominally, but he didn't control the company truly. It took him 3 years to realize this. By 2024, Hartwell Properties had become caught in a state of paralysis. Richard would want to approve a major acquisition, and the outside investors would block it. Richard would want to modify the company's direction, and the investors would refuse to cooperate. The company wasn't failing because I had been strategic about which shares I sold and to whom I sold them. All of the investors I had selected were competent and understood how to preserve the value of their investment. But the company was also not thriving the way it could have been. It was stuck in a state of perpetual mediocrity, unable to move forward, unable to achieve its full potential. And Richard was confused and frustrated, unable to understand why his control over the company felt so incomplete. That's when he came to me with the offer. The second offer. The real offer. He came into my office. Yes, I have an office now, even though Richard doesn't know why. On an ordinary Thursday afternoon in April, exactly 24 years after Marcus had told me that he knew my secret. He closed the door behind him, and he looked at me with an expression that I had never quite seen before. It was a mixture of desperation and anger, and something that looked like hope. He said, "I know what you did. I don't know how, and I don't know when, but I know that the deadlock we're experiencing with the outside investors isn't a coincidence. I know that someone with knowledge of our family and our company coordinated the sale of those shares. I think it was you." My heart, which had been so calm for so long, suddenly began to race. After all these years, after all the patience and strategy and careful planning, had I finally been caught? Had Richard finally understood what I had done? "I'm going to make you an offer," he continued. "I want you to work with me to break the deadlock. I want you to help me negotiate with the outside investors, or I want you to tell me who they are so I can negotiate with them myself. In exchange, I will give you anything you want. A partnership in the company, official, legal, recognized. A seat on the board. A significant percentage of the company's profits. A position as co-CEO. Name it, and it's yours. I can't run this company the way it should be run with these constraints, and I think you might be the only person who can help me. So please help me, and I will give you everything you've ever wanted from this family." And as he said it, I realized something. I realized that he had no idea what I had actually done. He suspected something, but he didn't understand the true scope of it. He didn't know that I had been a major shareholder. He didn't know that I still controlled 14%. He didn't understand that the empire he thought he had built was actually something that I had allowed him to build. He thought he was offering me power, when the truth was that I had possessed power all along. He just didn't know it. I looked at him, and for the first time in 24 years, I told him the truth. I told him about the numbered corporation in the British Virgin Islands. I told him about the layers of trusts and holding companies. I told him about every dollar I had saved, every investment I had made, every decision I had carefully orchestrated from the shadows. I told him about the 47% I had accumulated and about the strategic sale of 33% to investors that I had selected specifically to maintain leverage over his future decisions. I told him about Marcus and about the conversation in his study and about the respect that he had shown me. And most importantly, I told him why I had done it. I told him that I had done it because I understood something about the Hartwell family that he had never understood. I had understood that in a family business, real power isn't granted, it's taken. Real power isn't offered, it's seized. And real power, true power, is often invisible. It works from the shadows. It influences without being seen. It controls without being acknowledged. That's what I had learned, and that's what I had done. I had built an invisible empire while everyone around me was performing their visible roles on the stage of family and business. He sat there in silence for a very long time. I watched his face cycle through various emotions: confusion, shock, anger, something that looked like betrayal, and then finally, something that looked like admiration. He said, "So you're telling me that you've known all along? You've known that the company couldn't move forward without your consent. You've been watching me struggle, knowing that you could help me, but choosing not to." "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what I've been doing." And he asked me why. Why had I not helped him? Why had I allowed him to suffer with a company that he couldn't properly manage? Why had I kept the secret for so long? And I told him the truth about that too. I told him that I had kept the secret because I had understood that if I revealed it while we were still in a position of equals, he would never see me as an equal. He would see me as a threat. He would resent me. He would fight me for control. And I had kept the secret for all these years because I was waiting to see if he would grow into someone who could accept that his success was not entirely his own. I was waiting to see if he would grow into someone who could understand that the most powerful people in the world are often the ones who let others believe they're in charge while they remain in control in the shadows. And then he made me an offer. Not the offer he had been planning to make when he walked into my office. A different offer. He offered me official partnership in Hartwell Properties. He offered me the title of co-CEO, with full authority over all major business decisions. He offered me a percentage of the company's profits that would ensure my financial security for life. He offered me, finally, after 24 years of marriage, a position of real respect and real power within the family business. And I accepted. Not because I needed the offer, but because I wanted to be acknowledged. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be respected. And most importantly, I wanted to show everyone, my mother, Catherine, Richard, Victoria, my children, and everyone else who had ever underestimated a woman because she was quiet or because she didn't speak about her intelligence or because she was content to work from the shadows, that the most powerful people in the room are often the ones you're not paying attention to. They're the ones you underestimate. They're the ones you expect to fail because they don't fit your image of what success should look like. And they're the ones who are quietly building empires while you're too busy looking at the stage to notice what's happening behind the curtain. This is the story I've never told before. This is the secret I've carried for decades. And I'm telling it to you now because I'm ready to stop hiding. I'm ready to stop being invisible. I'm ready to be acknowledged as the architect of my own success, the builder of my own empire, the person who understood how power really works when everyone else was still playing by the rules that had been set for them. And I'm telling it to you because I believe that there are other people out there, other women, other people who have been underestimated, other people who understand that the most effective way to achieve power is to let others underestimate you while you work toward your goals, who need to hear this story, who need to understand that you don't have to play the game by the rules you've been given. You can create your own rules. You can build your own empire. You can work from the shadows and emerge into the light whenever you choose to do so. If this story has resonated with you, if you've found yourself thinking about the power dynamics in your own family or your own life, I want you to do something for me. I want you to comment below and tell me, what did you think Elizabeth should have done? Should she have revealed the truth earlier? Should she have allowed Richard to remain in control? Should she have used her power more openly from the beginning? Or do you think that the path she chose, the path of patience, strategy, and invisible influence, was the right one? I'm reading every single comment, and I want to hear from you. This is your chance to be part of the story, to engage with it, to shape the conversation around how power works and how we achieve success in a world that often tries to keep us invisible. And please, if this story has meant something to you, if you believe that stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to all of Revenge Stories. Help me prove that these narratives matter. Help me prove that voices like mine, like yours, like everyone else's who has been underestimated and overlooked, deserve to be amplified and celebrated and heard. Because that's what this channel is about. It's about breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. It's about empowering people who have been told that their experiences don't matter. It's about creating a space where the people who have been working in the shadows can finally step into the light. Subscribe now, and let's continue this conversation together. Because there are so many more stories to tell, and I want to tell them with you.